Well, hey, good morning, everybody. I thought I'd come back to this temple complex that I had found here in Lebanon. And I thought the next day, I can come back in and read chapter 17 to you, which is what I'm going to do right now. Okay, so I'm reading chapter 17 out of the Hittite warrior. And I thought this was a kind of an interesting place to be. So I'm just going to read it. This one's called The Ruler. Remember, they were having a kind of a trial where they were setting up Uriah. They basically were going to kill him and get their revenge for what he had done in taking away the sacrificial offering to Moloch in the form of Jabin. And now there was a knock on the door during the proceedings, and it sounds like the Great One, meaning Sisera, is there. All right, and we'll see what happens. Do not worry if my ear disappears. I can still hear just fine. All right, here we go. Chapter 17, The Ruler. The door was swung open. A man walked into the chamber, and I knew that he and no other could be the Great One of the city and of all the hill cities in Canaan. Remember, Sisera is the captain of all the Canaanite warriors. So when all the Canaanite armies get together, they are under Sisera's control. All the room seemed smaller for his entrance, for he was a big, black-bearded man, the tallest and broadest shouldered among them all. He had wide-set eyes, black as night under thick, straight brows, and the nose of a hawk, a Hittite nose. Every curl in his rich beard was oiled, and it was held in place by a golden mesh studded with jewels. The rings on his hands, the gold collars and bands about his neck and arms dazzled the eyes. The sacred metal about his neck was carved lapis lazuli, and a single emerald from Egypt of great weight studded his right ear. All except the high priest of Moloch cringed and bent before him. "The great chair!" called the chief elder. "Let the great chair be brought for the ruler of Harosheth." "There is no time," said the Lord Sisera. He sat himself down unceremoniously on the high bench, and the chief elder and the priest stood respectfully beside him. He sounded grim and angry. "Great things are happening. Even as you sit here, I have had news that the town of Beth-shan has been raided by Hebrew tribesmen. Squads of soldiers have been attacked and slain by bands of shepherds. Never in 100 years have they dared such things. It has begun." A babel of voices began in the chamber, but was stilled when the ruler turned his blank, dark gaze upon the elders. I stood bewildered in my chains, thinking that I had been forgotten by everyone. But all the while my eyes were on the Great One of Harosheth, and my heart was saying, this man was my father's friend. "The council will hear the words of the Great One without delay," said the chief elder shrilly. "Let the prisoner be taken back to the prison." "Wait," cried Sisera, and suddenly the black eyes were turned upon me. Their gaze struck me like a blow. "With what has this prisoner been charged?" "He is guilty, my lord," said the priest of Moloch, "of the highest sacrilege against the gods. He has cheated the Lord of Wrath in Tyre of his sacrifice." The black eyes widened a little, but they did not seem shocked. I even thought there was a gleam of admiration in them. "I do not know he is guilty," said the chief. "You, Uriah Tarhund, are you guilty?" He knew my name. Perhaps the guard had gotten word to him after all. But I could not answer him, for by this time I was so confused and tired I did not know whether I was guilty or not. There is more, said the priest of Moloch. The young man is a traitor to all the gods of Canaan. And while my heart sank, he told the chief of Harosheth of their questions to me concerning the Hebrews, and of my terrible answer. The great one stared at me steadily for a moment. There was no expression in his eyes except for a kind of calculating look, and yet a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Then he turned back to the elder and the priest. The blasphemy, he said, was committed in our sister city of Tyre. Would you steal her revenge from our sister? Is this the time to turn the cities of the coast against us, when we of the hills have trouble in another quarter? The priest of Moloch leaned toward him to protest, but the great one slapped his hand down upon his knee and spoke in a loud voice. Let the prisoner be taken to the great house. All in Harosheth is mine. If he is the prisoner of Harosheth, he is my prisoner. I will judge him, and if my judgment goes against him, I will send him back to Tyre. But he leaned toward the priest of Moloch, and to my amazement, winked suddenly. But I will send him back in such a manner that when he reaches the gates of our sister city, he will not be alive to tell the tale. And so Harosheth will after all have the honor of his death, and yet Tyre cannot accuse us. The chief elder nodded at this, looking pleased, but the priest of Moloch stood back, his eyes narrow and gleaming with anger. There was nothing, though, that he could say against the great one. And so, more dazed than ever, I was taken from the temple. My chains were struck off, for Sisera had commanded it, and under guard they took me down the paved streets of Harosheth to the many-colored great house of the chief. I had no time or heart then to look about me. I only remember that once inside the great house I was taken in charge by a tall, powerful man, and that when I looked at him I gasped, for he was as black as ebony, like the black soldiers from Cush who used to guard the Minos for pay in Crete before the great earthquake. This one seemed to be a kind of servant, but there was a look of danger in his eye. And when I was shut inside a room down a passage, I knew he guarded the door. There was a great bed in the room, greater and more richly carved and inlaid than any bed in the house of Ethbal. I laid myself down upon it and felt nothing but its softness, for I was too weary even to be afraid. Soon I slept. When I woke, it was dark, and someone had lighted the little oil lamp. Whoever it was had seated himself at the foot of the bed. I raised myself and looked into the shadows. It was Sisera. In the dim light, I could see that he no longer wore the splendid robe and ornaments of the great one of Harosheth, but was dressed in a simple tunic, and might have been any powerful aging man, his black beard turning gray. "You have slept well," he said to me. "No, stay where you are. You have a right to rest." He rose and went over to the window, looking down upon the moonlit city. "The wind from the hills is cool tonight," he said. "It is a blessing. Canaan is hot after the winter. Was it cold by the shepherds' fires?" I swallowed a little and nodded. "The nights were chilly," I said. "And you slept in the open, wrapped in your robe, and lived like a farmer. I know. Suddenly he turned toward me. "I know who you are," he said. "When the slave from the prison spoke the name of your father, it winded me for a moment, and before I thought, I rewarded him, instead of having him slain for bribing his way in to see me. Your father, he added, softly, then stopped. When we spoke again, his eyes were glistening. I have never seen great Hattie, he said, but it is half my home. My mother is a Hittite. Yes, she is the daughter of the Hittite governor who ruled in Harosheth before the days of the Battle of Kadesh. See, here is my grandfather's ring. And he showed it to me on his strong, hairy-backed finger, a carnelian carved with the Hittite emblem of the double axe, just such a ring as my kinsman, the chief of Arzawa, had worn. My chest swelled with tears I could not shed. Your father came to me in Carchemish, he said, and saved me from a wild horse like one of those Hittite heroes in my mother's stories. I loved him. I never forgot him. The stories he told me about that land that was half my home, how the wind blew over the grasslands, how all the men were strong and all the women beautiful, how the horses roamed the steppes. Suddenly, the tears I could not shed before overcame me, and I found myself crying into my arms while Sisera watched me with that strange, calculating look. Cry if you like, Uriah Tarhund, he said. There is no shame in shedding tears for a homeland you will never see again. Someday, I sobbed, no. You will never see the land of the Hittites again, said Sisera. It is a land of strangers now. It is no more except in the hearts of its children and in its standard, which is here in the great house of Harosheth. Would you turn against that standard, Uriah? Yeah, standard is a flag, like an emblem on a flag. No, I cried. Suddenly, Sisera bent over me, and he was again the terrifying, godlike man he had been in the council chamber. Tell me what you know of the Hebrews, he said harshly, and looking into his cold black eyes with the thought of that standard of great Hattie in my heart, I told him. 5 of their tribes have joined the rebellion, I said. There is no danger from the coast tribes, for they will not join. How many will this give them? Perhaps 10,000 men. Where will they meet? On Mount Tabor, south of the Great Lake. Who leads them? A man called Barak ben Abinoam of the tribe Naphtali, near here. Sisera heaved a great sigh, then sat down and wiped his forehead. I lay back on the bed, numb and exhausted. It is finished, I thought. I have betrayed them. All this is true, Sisera muttered at last. How do you know that, my lord? I mumbled, not much caring whether he believed me or not. Because I know it already, he replied. A man from the plain near Kadesh came and told me, for a good price. Heber the Kenite, I should have known before. Then why, I cried, did you make me tell? Because, said Sisera, if you had not told, I would have sent you back to Tyre dragging over the ground at the end of a rope bound to a galloping horse. For though I loved your father, I love Harosheth and the gods more. And those who fight for them, I must know to be on their side. I rose slowly in the great bed and drew my hand across my forehead in wonder. Then now, I said, I am free? I am your judge, said Sisera, and I have found for you, which means not guilty. But the priest of Moloch will bow before me like all the rest, said Sisera harshly. I am great one here. Now get up. I obeyed him, as all must. I have something to show you, he said. I followed him down the great stone stairway and into the dark street of the city. The black man, who I learned later was Sisera's armor bearer and charioteer, and his bodyguard against assassins, walked silently along with us, as did a servant bearing a torch. I drew the air of the fortress city deep into my chest. I should rejoice, I thought, that I am free again, but I could not rejoice. I could feel nothing at all. As we walked, Sisera talked calmly of preparations for the fighting. There is little time, he said, to send for horses and chariots from Egypt, if they would send them, and I think they would not. Egypt has troubles of her own in these days, but there are still horses in the north, chariots too, and our own workmen here in Canaan are becoming more skillful. How many will there be? I asked him, not really caring. Enough, he replied. 20 horses for our troops are stabled here in Harosheth tonight. That is where I am taking you. For the first time, my heart stirred. There were few horses in Canaan except those imported for battle. These Canaanites do not love horses. I have seen them shiver at the thought of them, and as I have sometimes shivered at the thought of an Egyptian cat. But already my hands were aching for the feel of the smooth skin over the moving muscles, for the touch of the soft muzzles in my palm. They took me to the stables near the city wall, with its roofs of palm leaves. I could smell the well-remembered stable odor, hear the familiar stable sounds, the soft puffings and pawings. The servant held the torch aloft as I ranged over the open stalls, feasting my eyes on the handsome animals and whispering to them. Suddenly I stopped. In one of the stalls was a stallion, a little larger than the others, of a shining honey gold. His ears were longer too, and his ribs strong as a barrel. And he had a look of horses from the south. My heart beat faster. Where did he come from? I asked. He is not a northern horse, but neither is he a horse of the desert. Sisera said nothing. I stepped closer. The animal whinnied in alarm, then bent his head and laid his muzzle against my neck. Then I knew. Labernash, I said. My colt. I raised him. I trained him. I gave him to the Great One in Hattusis because he was the best I had to give. Look how he knows me. My arms were around the strong neck, my face buried in the short, coarse mane. The Canaanite servant looked a little sick, but the startling eyes of the black man gleamed. Where did they find you, you beauty, you darling? I cried. He was the favorite of the young lord of great Hattie, Subliuliuma, said Sisera. He who would have been the second of that great name had he not died with his father at the hands of the sea people. I found him by chance on a trip to Carchemish. He was in the stable of the young king's armor bearer who had escaped from Hattusis after it was destroyed. He told me who it was who had given the animal to the king, and it seemed as if it was a sign to me. And I brought him here. If you had answered me falsely, he would have dragged you on your death journey to Tyre. But now he will draw your chariot in battle against the Hebrews. Okay, that's chapter 17. Now look at the situation Uriah finds himself in. He likes the Hebrews. He loves Tamar, who is Hebrew. He respects the Hebrews. He betrayed the Hebrews. And now he has his father's friend who has now said, you will fight for us with Labernash as your horse. That's a tough situation. He's going to fight against Barak bin Abinoam, someone he respects. Difficult situation for young Uriah to be in. We'll talk about this later. All right, guys, have a great day.